Today's podcast is brought to you by Eddie. Find better candidates, conduct more focused interviews, and make data-driven hiring decisions. Hire Eddie, hire faster, hire smarter, hire more. Learn more at eddie.com. Now, let's podcast. Welcome to Disrupt Salt Lake City. My name is Jared Olson, and I am joined today with Brant Waldron and Aubrey Bates. How are you guys doing today?
Good.
Doing good.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so very much for joining us. So today's podcast, we're going to explore the world of recruiting and better ways to recruit and how we can kind of change the industry and what's going on out there from specifically like internal recruiters that work for a company and how to change that. And so both of you have really great background working in the staffing world and doing outplacement. And so I kind of like to learn a little bit more about that, and we'll kind of dive into that conversation, and then we'll get into a little bit more about some of the things, Brant, that you're doing that's really kind of shaking up the world, which is kind of cool. So, Brant, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of you, where you've been working, and talk to us about what you're working on right now.
All right. So, my name's Brant. Once again, thanks, Jared. I have been in staffing for the last 7 years, in technology before that, when I first moved to Utah from Montana. And I left the staffing company I was at the end of last year to start a continuous sourcing platform.
Cool.
So that's what I've been kind of working on in the dark by myself with the
It's a lonely world in entrepreneurship, isn't it?
It's a lonely, dark world. And I relate it to a bipolar pony ride.
Uh-huh.
Some days it's like, oh, everything's great, this is the best, and then it's like the worst pony ride ever, and you're self-doubt and
But you were prepared for that, having been in staffing.
Oh yeah, staffing's like you do that every day, if not on the hour.
Yeah. So your staffing experience was through an agency.
Yes.
And so you primarily hired technical positions?
Yep.
Okay, cool. And Aubrey has been on the Disrupt SLC board ever since Disrupt entered into the Salt Lake City market, and is now also part of the Disrupt Boise crew. And so you're just also leading the charge in the Disrupt world, which we're grateful for. And you also are at Spherion Staffing. So talk to us a little bit about just your overview for the audience.
I've been in staffing long enough to know that it is much like a bipolar pony ride. So I run the Utah market as the area vice president, and I am part owner in the Boise, Idaho market. We have a little bit of a unique perspective because our staffing hits all the verticals. So we can truly partner with the company and work with their general entry level staffing all the way up to the headhunting executive level placement. And Brant and I have been good friends for a bit now, and I really appreciate what he's building because our market and our industry is changing so quickly that innovation is what's going to drive the better performance of agencies as well as internal recruitment teams. So excited for the conversation today.
Okay, so first question. You guys both have been in the staffing world at different companies, and so yet you mentioned you're excited about what Brant is doing. How do staffing agencies and recruiters get along with other recruiters? Like, you guys obviously have had a good relationship. How does that happen when you're actually competing against each other?
Respect.
I think we know what the other person goes through on a day-to-day basis. I would say some of my closest friends are executives at competing agencies. 3 of my absolute ride or die friends compete with us on a regular basis. And I think the competition makes us healthy. People like Brant help keep the bar of performance and professionalism really high, and I respect that and I appreciate that. And at the end of the day, we build off each other. It's not necessarily competing as much as it is collaboration, and I think that's what we're finding in a lot of different companies right now. We see more millennials in leadership that are more based out of the tendencies to collaborate and to build and to join forces as opposed to compete. Brant does a lot of things far better than I do, and I might do this, and he might feel the same about me in certain areas. So when it comes to competition, there's enough business to go around right now. If we see another 2008, I think maybe that would change paradigms just a little bit.
Might get a little more fierce.
Yeah, maybe a little. Maybe the boxing gloves would be on, but right now, I think it's pretty true of most agencies that are successful in this market. They realize that playing in the sandbox together is what's best for our clients.
So do you just find those agencies who complement your portfolio? And I mean, Brant's been doing heavy technical stuff. So when you work with another agency and they want like an accountant, are you quick to say, hey, let's pass this over to a different agency? Or would you try to place an accountant through a tech company?
It really depended on the relationship. Like if they said, hey, I mean, you get clients that say, hey, I just want to work with you. Can you do this for us? And there's those one-offs, but if it's something where it's going to be like a lot of heavy, like, hey, we need this over and over, then I'd go push it to somebody else.
Okay.
So I'd reach out to Aubrey and say, hey, can you do this? Or, whatever people have specialties in, just because you can't be everything to everyone in staffing. It's really, really hard.
I really think in order to be successful, especially right now in this market, is any healthy companies knows their strengths and they can also address their weaknesses. And there's the collaboration is probably overused, but it's true. There's enough opportunity for us to be able to pick up the phone and call a competitor and say, what's best for the client here is we team up on this and we work together, because at the end of the day, our goal is always keep our clients happy. Mm-hmm. And we can't always do that on our own. So leveraging other resources is probably the best strategy and maybe the most underutilized, but it's definitely becoming more and more relevant. Candidates are turning away from online platforms. Technical talent they're getting 30 to 40 in-mails a week. So, if there's a very, say it's a senior Android position and my Android pipelines run dry and I've placed all my Android talent, Brant's the first person I would call and say, Brant, hey, who do you know in the Android space? Because ultimately at the end of the day, if the customer's happy and we're both winning, there's nobody losing in that scenario.
Cool. I like it. Okay, another question that maybe a C-suite member or a startup company that's listening to this podcast would have a question about is, when should you hire internal recruiters versus using an agency? How would you guys respond to that? I mean, you're going to be a little biased here, but I'm curious about your perspective.
Always use an agency. Just always use an agency.
It's really tough, right? I mean, it depends on your growing. If you're VC funded, there's a number of things like how tightly you care about your money, mm-hmm. right? 'Cause some companies are out there that get VC money and they just need to hit a benchmark in number of employees, right? Mm-hmm. Then you're going to be better. It's better to utilize third-party agencies to help you get to that number, right? Because they can go out. They're much more aggressive. They can go out and they can find the people. But I think it's crazy, and you're seeing more and more companies move to the way of building out their own internal teams over time.
Yeah.
And it's just we talked about it a little bit last week, where you're just getting people that are moving jobs so much that it's hard when they come in through an agency. If you pay them a big fee, if they're on contract, then great. That's a beautiful thing. It's a great way to bring them people in is through an agency. But if they come in and you pay them a large, 20, 30 K up front, to recuperate that cost over maybe a year and a half, sometimes 2 years. That's what people seem to be sticking around for that are younger. They're jumping a ton, so it's hard to get back. So how do you kind of evaluate that money?
Yeah. I think to piggyback on that, I think that companies really have to identify what their feasible growth really looks like. We have a lot of overzealous CEOs who think that they're going to go from being in the negative to being the next
unicorn.
Yeah, everybody thinks they're a unicorn, which we do have unicorns, especially in Utah, and kudos to those who've done it well. One of the things that we notice a huge trend is the ramp of a large internal recruiting team and then major layoffs. I don't know of a single internal recruiter who can't tell you if they've done this for more than 4 or 5 years that they've been laid off.
Yep.
Or that they're worried about being laid off. So everything is about organic growth. Smart business is about leveraging your best resources in the maximum way that you can. I believe in internal recruiting teams. Some of my best partnerships come from internal recruiting teams because there's a value of somebody who sits on site, who the hiring managers can look at in the eyeballs at any given moment, and who can interview and give tours. And I think internal recruiting teams have a really good focus on the trajectory of the company in a way that recruiters might struggle to do. But there's also the supplement of having a recruiting partner who can help on some of the purple squirrel or more niche positions, because you might have one in-house TA who's trying to fill 3 engineer jobs and 45 call center jobs, and they may be well equipped to fill the call center jobs, but if they don't speak the right language on some of the engineering jobs, they're going to ruin your company's brand in the process because they simply can't engage with the right talent the way they need to. So I see leveraging headhunting, and that I mean, temporary staffing and contingent labor is a completely different conversation. But when it comes to the headhunting and recruiting world, I see leveraging headhunting to fill your niche, hard to fill, sometimes even confidential or really strategic positions, because you can go get experts in the field and leverage a larger talent pool, and allowing your internal recruiting team to do what they do best. Because I've yet to meet a recruiter who can fill a call center and also go find a CFO and find the right CFO, because it's not to say they can't bring some talent to the table, but is it the right talent? And then also having had the experience of hiring hundreds of people. If they're a new recruiter, they probably haven't hired hundreds of people for a variety of companies and have the right language and the right rapport to be able to really engage in those conversations. And lastly, I think it's definitely a game of numbers and making sure that again, people's time is allocated where they can be most successful. And that's my 2 cents.
Nice. Okay, so a question that I've heard from a few C-suite members is the fear of using a staffing agency is you'll place someone, and what's to stop you from going and stealing that candidate and placing them in another job a little bit later? How do you respond to that?
Character.
Yeah, this does happen.
Yeah.
This absolutely happens, and it's disturbing. There's a couple competing agencies that do this.
Name drop. Just kidding.
I'll tell you later. But there are agencies that do this. And, this is what the one question I say to a lot of companies when we sit down and have meetings is, we dive into our clientele, and we're very picky on who we work with. So you don't see our name on every billboard. You don't see our name on every job board, because that's not who we are. We do really strategic placements, and we do really strategic partnerships, because you can't work with everybody and be loyal.
Yeah,
so if I'm working with every company in Silicon Slopes, I'm at some point going to bite the hand that feeds me. Mm-hmm. And I highly encourage all contracts to be reviewed, and there to be a clause that allows the agencies to remain in integrity and not pull talent that they've placed there, whether that's over a time period or whether it's not. But it's a very short-sighted way of doing business. I would rather have the same customer and place 5 or 6 placements with them than have one and pull him and put him somewhere else later. There's a moral dilemma. At times, candidates reach out and say, hey, I've been here a year and a half.
Well, that's kind of the kicker, right? Is if a candidate's placed by an agency, if they start to become unhappy, who are they going to reach out to?
Agency.
That agency that they've had relationship with. And so a lot of times it's, companies are getting better at this, but you got to do a good job of keeping your employees happy, engaged. You have to have paths for them to grow and to learn. If not, they're going to get stagnant. Mm-hmm. And if they are, and if they're someone that you hired in the first place for a challenging job, they're going to leave because they thought they had a challenging job, or that challenging job went away, and they're going to be like, "Oh, I'm bored."
Yeah.
Right. So there's a balance. It's not just always on. There are some unethical staffing firms out there that will definitely go and poach their own candidates, and send them somewhere else after their guaree's over. Right. That just happens. But
are those few and far between? Like, or are there a lot of people that do it?
I think it's more prevalent in the tech space than you see other places, because technical talent is so tight.
And if you get a good person and you're like, I know this person, I know they're going to get placed here, and I can make $30,000. That's pretty hard for someone to say no to say no to, right?
Yeah.
But for the C-suites operating in fear of a staffing agency coming in, like, put in some clauses, right?
Yeah.
Make good agreements, or make a strategic partnership like Aubrey's talking about.
Yeah.
Those are the best things. If you have an agency that's trying to sign up everybody in town, eventually they're going to have to basically come back and start stealing from their own clients.
That does happen. And I do think it's about finding partners that can meet your needs across a variety, because if you're we get this a lot where companies say, this is a very specific agile position, and we're working with somebody who focuses just on, Epic or Agile, these very key people. And then I say that's unfortunate, because by doing that, yes, they do have a candidate pool, but their candidate pool only extends so far. And if you're only ever going to use them for that role, you are not of value to that agency. And it's very easy for them to come back later and take the same talent that they placed. Work with a partner that's going to be able to partner with you on a variety of positions, that's invested in your company, invested in your culture. Essentially, a recruiting firm should be an extension of your HR department. Yeah. They should share your brand, they should share your mission and your values, and they should leave every candidate that they talk to better than they found it, and in the name of your company.
Yeah, and wanting to work at your company,
Yeah.
right? Good recruiters can sell your company better than your hiring managers can, right?
And when they perform at that level, it's very important as a company that you own that relationship and you make it a priority, because on the flip side, you have agencies that do tremendous, wonderful things for a company, and another agency comes in and says, okay, they're at X percent, I'm going to cut it by 2% because I want your business, and they drop their agency like that. Mm-hmm. And so
then you just let the wolves into the hen house,
exactly.
right? Because literally you just torched the contract. They placed a bunch of people there. Why aren't they going to go steal?
Yeah,
right. You didn't have any loyalty to them, so it's got to be, like you're saying, a true partnership.
A very strategic partnership.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So let's kind of shift gears just a little bit here. I want to talk about proactive recruiting. So one of the benefits of an agency is that you have this crazy pipeline of talent. You're talking for hundreds of different companies in this great database that's already built. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing a lot of companies out there are struggling proactively recruiting, which is why their time to hire is so long and why the cost of turnover is so extensive, because they wait for somebody to leave, and then they have to post, and then they have to wait for candidates, and then they have to interview, and then they have to make an offer and wait for 2 weeks and onboard them, and it just gets crazy. And so one of the things that disruptive HR people are doing is building out this proactive pipeline of candidates. Why don't we see that more often? And what are some effective ways you have seen people effectively build out that pipeline?
We're not seeing it very often because many people haven't met Brant and Brant's product.
Well, we'll get into that. We'll get into that. But I'm just thinking, like, in an HR department, like, why aren't HR professionals doing this more often?
I still think hiring is not on the top of their list.
Yeah.
I think hiring should be, if you're hiring, you're growing, hiring needs to be your number one initiative.
Well, and a lot of companies they have the right approach. Hiring is not always deemed an HR function.
Hiring is sales.
Yes.
It is a sales function. You are selling the brand, you're selling the company, and I believe if you sell a candidate on the company, that they will stop looking for other jobs, they will invest more in the interview experience, they will stay longer, and they might even accept a little less money because they're so invested in what you're accomplishing. But that has to come through a really good sales process. And so do you think that the HR professional is not good enough at selling?
No, I just think when HR to me is post-hire, that's when human resources should really engage, is after somebody's been hired. Because if you have, a lot of successful companies I work with, their talent acquisition is separate from their HR.
And do you like that?
I do like that because it is sales, but it's not only sales, it's relationship building. And here's what my colleague just wrote an article about this, because we talk about it so much internally. He said, I'm just going to write an article about it because it was so frustrating for us, because you have hundreds of candidates applying for one job. 99% of them are having a bad experience because you only hire one for one job. And so what you really should be doing is strategically looking at the 99% that did not get the job, not the 1% that did. That one person who got the job, great. They go to HR, they get onboarded, and now it's HR's job to keep them in. But talent acquisition's job is to make sure that all of the people that have applied are left with such a good experience that they say, next opportunity is mine. And that's what agencies have the ability to do, because agencies aren't just going and buying for one job. They have the ability to say, hey, Jared, this wasn't it, but I got this.
3 more.
Or let's look at these. Or what about this? And so it keeps the candidate engaged. Internal teams struggle keeping candidates engaged after they've been dispositioned. I'm sorry, but if I've taken paid time off to come in and interview with your company, I've put together a resume, I've done your testing, I've done your screening, I've gone through your process, I've invested 5 or 6 hours of my time into your company, only to be dispositioned by a call or an email, never to be talked to again.
And like a system-generated email even, right? Oh, thank you for your time, you were not selected. Mm-hmm. It's like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
These are people that, just because they're not a good fit right now, maybe they're a little junior, well, what about in a year?
Yeah.
Right? You got to think about, you always have to think where that person's going to be in the future, right? Mm-hmm. And so if this person's great, like, oh man, we really love this person, you'd be a great fit, you're just not at the level we need, well, don't just snip the cord and walk away. Build a relationship.
That's your proactive recruiting that you're talking about. That is the quickest, most easiest way for a company to proactively recruit, is to maintain a strong relationship with anybody who has ever applied for a job with their company. And this is why, this is a side topic real quick, we need to have stop one-click applies. because candidates are one-click applying to companies they don't even realize they're applying to because they're desperate. They have a bad day at work. They go in, they one-click apply off of, who knows which website, which job board, and there is no interactive process with a one-click apply. So they can look at it and say, in their mind, it's, well, yeah, I went on and applied with XYZ company. And XYZ company's like, well, it's in our database somewhere. We've never even spoken to this person.
Yeah, and you applied on a job board that didn't go into our ATS, and so we don't even really have access to it.
We don't even know that.
Yeah, or you go into the HR black hole and you get people just signing up that are not good fits for these roles.
Yeah.
Right? If you're a good fit for a role, you're going to spend more time to sign up for it. But if it's just a click,
Yep.
like then you get people into the HR black hole, and it's not necessarily HR's fault. It's a combination of both sides. Where, you get 200 people for a role, you're not going to review them all.
Yeah.
You don't. Review the first 30, you can get 10 and interview them and move on from there.
We really need to get rid of one-click apply. Let's all vote for that right now.
Yes, I approve.
I vote.
Okay, so we definitely have a need out there to find talent. It is the biggest issue with keeping talent. It's the biggest issue with creating a great culture. And people are the most important asset of any business. And it all starts from the hiring process. I do believe that human resources are not good at sales. And that's why if you've ever tried to sell a product to human resources, they never buy because they don't know how to take it back to the CFO and say, here's the value proposition and here's what we'll get out of doing this. So with that, Brant has come up with, honestly, a brilliant idea. And it's a disruptive idea, and it's changing the way that hiring will work. So Brant, tell us your brainchild here. This thing is phenomenal.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure about that, but obviously been spending a lot of time in staffing, and I started my career in technologies, and I actually always wanted to get back there. And so I always kicked around the idea of making like an ATS, but that's a behemoth, right? Like I think I would go under before I even got the wheels on it to start taking off. So I started thinking about, well, what can I do? And I started talking to different hiring managers, and a lot of them started going out and getting like their own LinkedIn premium accounts. And they started doing their own recruiting. And you're seeing more and more people go out because either the team doesn't have enough HR help to do it, they don't have internal recruiters, or they can't pay for third-party recruiters, so they're stuck. They have to really go out and try to find people on their own. So they started messaging people, and it started kind of dawning on me that, like, what if we helped hiring managers, or in this instance, it could be internal recruiters, it could be external recruiters, do a better job of continually to source, where they don't have to spend all the time finding the resumes and uploading them into the ATS and then scheduling a call with them or calling them. So came up with the idea to do basically continuous recruiting, continuous sourcing. So where if someone signs up on our application, they'll be able to get, on our initial plan is 3 roles, and they get 3 resumes per week per role. So the idea is to always be recruiting. Whether you're looking for someone or not, you're always looking. You always are reviewing people, and that's what makes agencies so great, is they're always looking. Mm-hmm. You may not have a job for 6 months at XYZ company, but that agency you're working with is always recruiting. If they find somebody like, oh, they're going to go there. Mm-hmm. Like, I know they can be a fit there, right? And they may even reach out to you and say, hey, this person just came available. Would you be interested in talking? Well, I think companies can start doing that more and more on their own. And hiring managers are normally the best people in my mind to sell the role. And they know the team, they know the culture, they know what they're looking for. A lot of times you get that watered down from HR, or if there's a good internal team, they can do a pretty good job. Third parties have normally crushed it on that, of going in and talking to the hiring manager and really finding out. But of them selling that position. So trying to give them the power to manage their own candidate pipeline.
Okay, so how does this impact the internal recruiter or talent acquisition team?
It could be a bolt-on to make them better at their job. Because at the end of the day, you end up dealing with people coming in for interviews, you're giving them tours, you're phone screening people. And a lot of times I think talent acquisition gets, they have to do the offers, they get bogged down with a lot of stuff. And normally the thing that gets pushed to the side is sourcing. Mm-hmm. Right? It's I think it's become harder and harder to do sourcing and do it well. and it's one of the things that gets the least amount of attention.
Would you rather see it as a bolt-on or a replacement? Because as we've kind of talked about this, I think it could be a replacement for the talent acquisition team. Instead of having someone in HR who doesn't know how to sell and doesn't know how to proactively build a pipeline, you can then empower the hiring managers to get 3 candidates a week that they can be meeting with, and then the hiring manager can make the decision. Yeah, you got like the offer letter and you got some onboarding stuff and tracking them in a database or whatever, but could it replace the internal recruiter and talent acquisition team?
Yes, I mean there's always different, because sometimes you're going to have just hiring managers that aren't good.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where I think companies need to get together and say within a department, who are our best 2 or 3 interviewing people? And make them kind of be an interviewing team for that department. And then they bring in that manager or whatever for that interview. But there's always good people in there facilitating those conversations. But yeah, I think eventually if you can get hiring managers to consistently be recruiting, where they're talking to people, and with a couple clicks in our software, they can reach out, send them a message, and just say, hey, Aubrey, I came across your experience. I'm looking for XYZ position. I'd love to talk with you. We're not in a hurry. We're going to have a role in 3 to 6 months, but we'd like to just see if maybe we're compatible and build a relationship.
So this is 100% proactive, not reactive. It is, we may have a need in the future. We would like to talk to you.
Yeah, I mean, you could use it as reactive, but like Aubrey and I have talked about, reactive is, you would need more than, I think, 3 resumes a week, right? You're going to need that to be 10, because you're like, I need people now type deal, right? So instead of building that pipeline, you're in a lot more like running mode, where I need to get people in, I need to talk to them. I don't want to spend 6 months trying to find the right person.
So how is this software finding candidates?
So we're going out to LinkedIn, the different job boards, and we're scraping. A lot of it, there's on the back end, is actually using recruiters to do like kind of the final stamping and vetting of them.
Okay, so if I was an applicant and I wanted to be found through your product and be put in front of somebody saying, hey, I need this new position and I think that I might be a good fit, how would I get the better attention from a product like this?
As of right now, we're not allowing applicants in. Because kind of like what Aubrey's talking about, you get people applying to jobs that they're just not good fits for. And I think one thing that we want to keep is, if we send 3 people to a hiring manager, that they're not all going to be great, right? They're not all gems. And to be honest, I think you do this in staffing. We used to give them 3 resumes or 3 people, and we would throw in one that wasn't as good. Because if you send them 3 gems, then they're going to be like, oh, well, what else is out there?
There must be fit. It's like when you go buy a house, you go see the first house, and then you can never show the best house first, because then you assume there's always going to get better incrementally, and talent, the hiring managers are the worst at that.
Yep.
So what if I'm a candidate, though, and I'm passive and I have no online presence? Would I be found?
No.
Okay, so if you really want to fit into this new future where we're proactively recruiting from hiring managers, you have to be online, you've got to have a LinkedIn profile, you have to have your resume on different job boards?
No, just on one. And one thing that we're working on is people that are attending user groups.
Okay.
Because a lot of people go to user groups, but they don't have great online profiles, right? And so we're working on being able to go and scrape those and then send the hiring manager's notification like, hey, Jared's going to this HR conference. You might want to go meet him there and further that relationship.
So I think, too, when you're looking at this online presence, I think that the one thing that nobody's thought so far into, just because we're so far, not too far, but we are far away. We look at this Gen Z that's coming into the market and a lot of millennials. We're seeing a staunch line in millennials where it's either they're active, they're engaged, and they're socially driven, or we're seeing a lot of millennials who are not on social media profiles. They are not building out blogs. They're not coding and sharing their results online. They're not, there's a lot of millennial executives who don't even have social media profiles, who don't even have LinkedIns. It's becoming more and more of I think it's kind of a middle finger to the system saying, I'm tired of being marketed at every time I get online and I Google something, it's marketed to me on my channels, my social media, and people have access to me 24/7. So in having specific tools like Scout, if there's a way that we can somehow delineate the right fit and the right talent and pull people in even as they're not as prevalent online, because I think we are seeing more and more generations stepping back from the internet, which is not what we anticipated. But Gen Z, we're seeing retail growing again, because millennials and Gen Zers are going back into the stores. They're not all buying online.
They want that experience.
They want the experience. So,
and we see that, right? The pendulum in all things. We talked about it in politics. Like, pendulum swings back and forth. I mean, from generation to generation. So, I mean, where people are stepping away. And that's why, like I said, I think then giving them a secure way to apply for jobs where they don't just throw it out there. And to be honest, like, I've done this. I've been a recruiter. I mean, a resume pops up, I'm on that, right? Like, if it's a good resume, you're on it.
Yeah.
Right? And so I don't want a system that's out there publishing their information. I want it just so, hey, we can send it directly to a hiring manager, and you can communicate with them back and forth.
Yep.
Hey, let's go to lunch, let's talk, let's build up a relationship. And you can get a lot more honest and transparent, I think, interview process, because, like I said...
walk us through that. So I'm a hiring manager. I get one of these candidates, and I say, oh, yeah, I do want to talk to him. How do you envision that playing out?
Yep. So in a system, you go in, send them a quick message, and we'll have it so you can email, text, and we're actually working to integrate all the social media accounts, although like I said, not everybody's on those, but the ones they do have, to try to do the best job of reaching them. Because you're not saying, hey, I want you for a job right now. I want to build a relationship. That's what the kind of the approach.
You want to grab a cup of coffee, or
let's go get a drink, or hey, let's have a 10-minute phone call and just let me tell you about our company.
Do you really see hiring managers taking that time? I think that's why we've developed out talent acquisition teams. Ideally, in a dream world, every hiring manager would be onboarded with some sort of 2-day training on how to recruit talent, because that is, hiring managers most often are the ones that struggle the most. They tend to be sometimes more of an emotional decision maker, and so do we really see hiring managers taking that proactive approach without this being driven from the top down? I can see in an organization where an executive says you own your team, and as a hiring manager you are bonused or you are whatever based on the performance of your team, and this constant proactive recruiting is part of our strategy. I see that being adopted a little bit more by hiring managers when it's part of the culture than for a one-off hiring manager, or to sell the HR and then have it implemented with hiring managers, because I foresee them getting so bogged down day to day. I mean, even within recruiting, you have hiring managers where you get them 5 solid resumes on a position that they're on fire to fill, and you still get a week before they turn around on it because hiring is not top of mind. So I love the product. I'm a huge fan, but I think there'd have to be a substantial paradigm shift in how hiring managers are onboarded, and that this is part of their job description, because it's hard to get the engagement even now.
Yeah, and I think that's a very, very good point. And I think there's, like I said, there's no perfect solution. And there's a lot of hiring managers that I see are moving that way, but like you said, there's a big portion of them that are not. And it will have to be something that's more driven from top down, or something that HR takes on and does it for them, and kind of in partnership with the hiring manager, where they both have access to the same pipeline, to where the HR can kind of help facilitate that. Because like I said, some HR or hiring managers, they're still hands-on with what they're doing, right? They're not just a manager. They're still very much hands-on. So that's why I said, and the other thing I try to do with my software is it's maybe 5 minutes a week. Yeah. Right? You can be in, you can click at it, you can look at your 3 candidates, you can star them in the system so it puts into your favorite candidates and puts them into your pipeline. You send them a quick message and you're done.
And if you want to do lunch, it's 3 lunches a week, which might be hard to come by, but if there's one you like, one of those 3 candidates a week, you're talking one lunch a week.
Yeah, one lunch or a coffee, or just even a phone call, right? Hey, let's call, I want to talk to Aubrey for 5-10 minutes, just see what she's doing.
Okay, so this idea could definitely change the way that we have historically recruited talent, and it is empowering the hiring manager to proactively recruit. What is your perspective, Aubrey, on what this means for the staffing world? Like, if your function has been providing candidates and now the hiring managers are getting them through software that's automated and scraping the best talent that's out there, how do you think something like this could impact your industry?
I think this is more of a threat to overbuilt out talent acquisition teams than it is to staffing agencies.
I like that.
I think people use staffing because it's a numbers game and because it makes sense. Most Fortune 500 companies have 20% of their staff as contingent workforce, because the ebbs and flows of growing and shrinking businesses is something that is not always within our control. Contingent staffing, if we're looking at that piece of it, the temp to perm, that covers a whole variety of roles for a whole variety of reasons. It's not just about hiring. It's about being able to ramp up for peak seasons, ramp down. I mean, we work with probably 30 accounting firms in the state, and there's only a very specific window where accountants need, clerks, and to hire on a clerk year round would make no sense. And to bring on the burden of hiring a clerk onto your payroll, covering all their burden for and employment costs for that short period would not make any sense. So that I don't really see it as an issue. I think this could actually be a great tool for agencies, for us also to proactively recruit, because agencies are always implementing new, latest and greatest tools to build their pipeline as well.
And to have a software that would scrape for you.
That would
do you use anything like that in the staffing world?
We have systems, for us, we have the systems that we've built internally that help scrape a lot of them, and especially a lot of the job boards and resumes that come through. Every resume that pops up on Indeed, I think we're in contact with immediately. But this is pulling from a variety of sources and gives an additional piece of being able to reach out and keep track of. So I think this is something that would build really well into agencies' back-end systems that they already have for an applicant tracking system. So when it comes to the contingent workforce piece, people don't necessarily use contingent staffing because they can't find talent. They do, part of it, but it's mostly because it makes sense for their business, for the ebbs and the flows of their business.
Yep.
And because the burden of hiring an employee, if you're in California right now trying to hire, most employers are saying it's way more affordable to go through an agency and then take on the employment burden. And I think as we see things changing with pay rates and increases in employment taxes and workers' comp going up, I think it makes sense for a lot of companies, especially small companies. Owning the burden of an employee is a big deal.
Well, I saw something the other day. Healthcare is like $20,000 a year now.
Yeah.
Like that was that's just, so yeah, the contingent workforce, could almost grow over the next decade.
We're
as
seeing
companies
a lot
try
of
to get away from paying for the all the benefits, the onboarding, and having that flexibility of, hey, I'm going to call Aubrey and say, I don't need this team of 10. Or, hey, I need a team of 10. And I know she can get them to me in a week.
Yep. Or I need these people through this season, and then us being able to offset them with another client. So ours is all about strategy. And people love working for an agency because I can go work on an assignment for 6 months without being tied to a company for the rest of my life. But then when it comes to the actual recruitment piece for perm placement and direct hire, there's still a very, very fascinating human element behind hiring. Data and analytics and AI is only as valuable as the people who are managing the process. And again, it's a full-time job sometimes. And there are people that my recruiters can get in front of and conversations that they can have that a tool cannot. So again, this is if we have a recruiter that focuses specifically on a niche industry, having the resource of Scout for them to proactively be recruiting and for them to proactively be bringing people into a talent pool, it's the same idea. It's just I work for these 18 companies. You fit, what one of them eventually is going to be hiring for this role. Can we build a relationship? So again, it's just a supplement to tools that we have. People will always use headhunters, and here's why. If I'm with XYZ company and I want to steal from ABZ company, their top, architect, but I've got a relationship or I've already taken 10 of their people, the last thing I'm going to do is call that architect. There's no way. But an agency or a recruiter can do that. I also won't have necessarily the expertise on a specific position, and the tool also won't have the expertise on a specific position. We need people who already have that built. And the conversations that can be had with candidates, hiring managers, especially the higher level hiring managers. If you're hiring directors and VPs, your hiring managers are the C-suite, and the C-suite's not going to do this. Some C-suites might, but you're never going to see.
But to them, 20, 30 grand is worth the time.
Bingo. So it could definitely take a piece of the industry that is very time consuming and monotonous for both agencies and internal teams. But I think there's always going to be a place, and the reason why Scout makes sense is because it can fit into just about any organization depending on which way you want to leverage the tool. We used to think Indeed was going to be the end of one of our businesses too, and now we all leverage Indeed and it's our best friend. So it's just another tool to put in our tool belts. And I actually think that talent is getting more and more critical of the way you find their information and the way you reach out and the way you connect. And so it makes sense to have an additional resource. So whether you're vetting your talent pool that you've found from Scout and you've got 12 people that you've really held on to for the past year, and you reach out to an agency, at the end of the day, a hiring manager's number one goal is who's going to make me the most money when I fill this job, because that's what we're in business to do. Yep. Nobody goes to work not to make money, because if our companies, even if you have the most philanthropic company in the world, if you're not making money, you can't be in business. So whether they're looking at those 12 people, I bet and I foresee them still reaching out to their agency partners saying, okay, I've got people in my pipeline already, get me your top 3, and then it's just a conversation of who's the best fit.
Okay. Brant, Scout, how does it fit in with like an applicant tracking system? Is it an applicant tracking system? Would it integrate with one? If I'm in HR and I want to involve you into our talent acquisition plan, are you just a totally separate tool, or how do you match?
As of right now, I'd say we're a completely separate tool, or like an ATS Lite. Like for a big company that needs tons of the applicant tracking system, features, we're not going to be it, right? But if you're just using ATS to bring candidates in, move them through a pipeline and track them that way, then yeah, right? We could replace an ATS. But for the most part, it'd be something where through API, we'd integrate and just push the candidates once they got to a certain point into the ATS.
Okay. I also think that we've made a really compelling argument here today for using software to proactively help us recruit. We've also talked quite a bit about the benefits of using a recruiter or an agency. On the flip side of that, when do you think a company could effectively manage talent acquisition with just their internal HR team?
I've yet to meet a company who does. Honestly, I have yet to meet a company who does.
Well, there's just so many. It's so broad, right? Especially if a company's growing. Mm-hmm. And sorry to cut you off. I just felt exactly what you're saying.
It's passion.
Yeah, there's
so much passion.
There's so many different, accounting, technology. Mm-hmm. Like if you get into internal talent acquisition team, they have strengths. They came from an agency normally, and they learned to recruit in technology or accounting, right? So they have holes throughout the company's profile of jobs. So they're not going to be the best to do that, right? And then how much time are you going to spend having them bogged down searching for accountants when you have 10 roles for technology?
When you look at certain roles, you are hunting nowadays. This is not post a job and get a response. In fact, our headhunting division, we rarely post a job. We hunt. This is
the applicants you get for posted jobs are garbage.
They're not people. The good people aren't out looking right now, and so your internal team is going to be far less likely to go hunt because they take home a check either way. We don't get paid unless we fill the job.
We don't eat.
Yeah, that's how we eat. So there's just a different approach and a different level. And again, when you talk about if the priority is to hire the best talent, you have your internal talent acquisition team who does a really good job of screening resumes that have come through. And then you go get a company who will go out and who will hunt and who will literally, now we're to the point where we are having to get really creative in the way we stalk other people. We're like little detectives. Or we have to leverage our networks and say, hey, Brant, this has happened. Brant, do you know so-and-so, and can you make an introduction? And so we're going, above and beyond that level of just sourcing. And by the way, sourcing is the worst part of recruiting. Everybody knows it. So that is why Scout has its perfect place in this industry, because everybody hates sourcing. Sourcing is a nightmare right now. But because you have tools and Scout to help you source, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to get a response from that candidate, or they're going to be readily available when your job comes open. So it's a great marketing tool for companies. It's getting people on board in your mission, in your values, saying when the day comes, I want to be ready. But that doesn't mean they'll always be ready. And that's where you have an agency partner. And
there's how many times have we missed out on candidates because we didn't talk to them for 3 months. Yeah. We talked to them and they said, oh, we're not looking, I'm happy. And then you reach out to them 3 months later and I moved.
New job, yes.
You're like, what the hell?
How does that happen so fast? It happens fast. And I think when you look at it, the investment it would take for a company to have a full stack, a full bench of recruiters to be able to recruit on every vertical, and I would know this because this is our employment model at Spherion, is hefty. And the only reason it makes sense for our company is because we fill for over 270 companies. Mm-hmm. If we were one company to try to house that sort of a bench, it would bankrupt us. And companies need to invest in marketing. Companies need to invest in sales. And while talent acquisition is probably the most critical part of an organization's success right now, we all understand people really do power our business. But to have that kind of a bench when you might only use a niche skill-specific recruiter for 3 jobs in a year, when you could outsource that and bring somebody else in on a sales team, maybe. It just makes far more sense.
Okay, so let's bring this all home. CFO has looking at their HR team. They have a few talent acquisition people, maybe an entire team, maybe one person. Then they listen to this podcast and they say, wait a second, we could bring in an agency and Scout And that combined could replace our talent acquisition team. Because if I have talent acquisition, I'm paying them a salary, and then I use you guys, there's a placement fee. So the CFO is saying, why am I paying twice as much? Could you entirely replace a talent acquisition team through a staffing agency and through the right software?
I think you can, but I also want to tie back to there is something to be said for the people who are on board. We honor and value internal talent acquisition teams. I think
they're not our enemy.
Yeah,
they're a
by
partner.
no means. And I think it depends on your company's growth goals. If you're going to hire 100 people over the next year, you probably need to have somebody in team. You absolutely need to have somebody in house.
Yeah.
Could it be the hiring manager though?
Yeah. It
If
could.
that's what their job is, right?
If it's outlined.
If their job is like 50% of your job is building out this team, then absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? Because they can go out, they're sitting with their team. If they're going to get referrals, their teams are going to give to them much more readily available than a third-party recruiter that's calling in and saying, hey, who do you guys know? How can we help out? Right? I mean, you could do that, but that's...
And that plays into the scout model, though,
yes.
Right?
Yeah, that's my dream, right?
Yeah.
Is every hiring manager. But that's not the case, right? I mean, companies aren't built that way or a lot of them where, hey, you get to do half hiring, right? We're growing that rapidly. Like, some people are hiring 3 people a year.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to have talent acquisition? No, right? Does that make sense? And that may not make sense for them to use a software to be continually recruiting. And you're like, you know what? I don't want to worry about it. I'm just going to have an agency give me the 3 people when I need it.
Well, and part of the software piece is that you have hiring managers who are vetting and talking and communicating with these people, but when it comes down to hiring them and bringing them in through the whole process, they're probably going to disposition it to the talent acquisition team.
Yep.
They're going to put it out and say, hey, these are the people I've been talking to. Use my name, reach out. Let's get them in here. Let's schedule the interviews. I mean, talent acquisition is more than just the sourcing piece. There's a lot that plays into it. But I do think we have companies, again, there's a big software company here. They're not software. They're a technology company who ramped up a whole 40 talent acquisition people and then laid off half a year later. Talent acquisition, I think, needs to be approached as a strategic role. And so, Brant's making me laugh. I think talent acquisition, it's just as strategic of a role as your sales team. You got to bring in the right people. You got to keep it lean. You got to have it make sense. You got to give them
And they need to be lean. I think that's a key thing. You get fat and then you get people sitting around and it's just... Talent acquisition, should be there to help facilitate for the hiring managers, for HR, and
but what you're talking about
is
the administrative side. It's not terribly strategic in nature.
Well, it should be. This is what my biggest complaint with companies is: why are you paying a sales team a commission and you're not paying your talent acquisition team's commission? They're bringing in the people who are making you money.
See, if company did that, that could be a big crusher to third-party agencies.
What would their commission be based off of? Like a placement fee?
Placement fees. So that's what's so they wonder, why is it that you can go out and get us all these people that my internal talent acquisition team can't? Well, if you're paying somebody, if you're hiring somebody junior and you're not paying them well and they don't have a talent pool to choose from, like our recruiters have 10, 15 years worth of relationships they leverage every time we get a job. You bring somebody in who has no relationships and they're just bombing people on LinkedIn. They're not set up for success, neither are you. Invest in their success, invest in their networking, help them build relationships, and pay them a commission.
You give even $1,000 a placement, right? It's chump change compared to what you're going to pay an agency, but you know how much that's going to motivate?
Yeah. What is the average placement fee for an agency right now?
10 to 30 grand. It really depends on what
in technology. Ours was around 20 grand average.
I'd say about 17 to 20.
Okay, what percentage is that generally of the annual income?
We see 20 to 30% right now.
We're 20 to 25. Harder roles we want higher.
Executive level, you're looking closer to 30, but yeah. Again, do you really want this? This is just a conversation of strategy. Talent acquisition is not just touching talent. It's about engaging talent, and that is a sales personality. I'm a PI analyst. I live and breathe and die by PI, and you can't get a really low extroverted personality with a high sense of patience and really low formality who's just kind of like the cool dude to go out there and hunt talent. This is a hunting game and a differentiating game. How am I different as an organization? And your internal talent teams, give them a scope of business. Anything that falls outside that scope, you bring in a partner. And you incentivize them every time they win on who they bring in. Because you have companies who are bringing in, we've got these organizations who ramp up 300-400 people, and they'll go through 600 or 700 just to get that core group. And when you're turning that many people off to your company, you better anticipate a really hard time hiring in a couple of months, because even agencies can't save you at that point.
Yeah, there's certain companies that have made a big black mark on their reputation, and we call people and like, nope, not going there.
Yeah,
like just flat out no. I mean, I worked with some companies here that were just nope. Didn't even get the full name out of my mouth, and it was like, no, I'm good.
Pass.
Click.
Okay, well, this has been really great. If you are looking for a solid talent acquisition strategy, I think that we've covered a lot of different aspects of that. Whether you're doing it internally, you're outsourcing it, you're using software, a combination of all that. There's possibilities to eliminate full-time talent acquisition people and have hiring managers do that. There's the implications of having a terrible hiring manager that might not be able to do that. And so you really have to figure out what works for your business and how to structure all of that. This is disruptive human resources right here in action, figuring out your strategic talent acquisition plan.
Well, I think the key thing you said there is you have to figure out your plan for your company, right?
Yep.
And it's kind of like, I look at it as like raising my kids. Like, each one of them has drastically different personalities. Your hiring managers or HR are going to be different, right? So like one hiring manager you can trust. They're going to be out there. They're going to use meetup groups all the time. Hey, you know what? They could be awesome building out their own pipeline and doing it. This person, no, they got to be handheld by HR, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to say the wrong thing, right? They're going to scare off everybody. So it's something where you have to be paying attention as far as what your internal team is doing as far as talent acquisition, what your hiring managers are, and then what you're having a third party do.
Well, at the end of the day, if you are leveraging all the right resources for your company, including software, agency, and a strong internal team, you're far better off than using just one, period. Yep. At this point, talent is king, and anybody who can put you and position you well in front of talent is your best friend. And this dials down to your CEO and your VP of HR or your CHRO need to be hand in hand. This is the number one conversations companies need to be having. There should be a proactive plan put in place, and too often our executives are ruling HR out of the conversation, when most of our HR executives, you included, Jared, this is what you do and this is what you know how to do. And so building out these kind of plans and making sure that it's the most strategic approach, and we're leveraging all the resources in all the right ways. It's kind of like having one pot in your kitchen. We don't cook with one pot. It doesn't work for everything. So it's understanding where each pot is most beneficial. I mean, unless you're me, because I just try to use the same pot to clean it as much as possible. But most normal people, just kidding, you have to know the purpose of each pot, and you have to use it when it's the right time. And that is why executives need to leverage their leadership in HR. You hire HR for the reason of people. So leverage them in these conversations, because most likely they're your best resource in building out these strategies, and too often they're not at the table when they need to be.
Awesome. Aubrey, Brant, thank you guys so very much for your time. We appreciate what you're doing. We're championing you guys and want Scout app to take off, and we're excited to see how that will help the talent acquisition strategies, and Aubrey, all that you're doing within Spherion. So thank you guys very much for your time today.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Jared.